There exists a boundary to what the human mind can safely hold, a threshold not marked by ignorance but by knowledge carried one breath too far, a point where the desire to understand curdles into a kind of metaphysical trespass, where to see clearly is not illumination, but transgression. I stood at that edge beneath 5 kilometers of Antarctic ice, a man sent to observe, not as a scientist, not as a priest, but something that could be both, and yet neither. The Vatican's Office for Theological Risk in Physics operates without publicity. Its charter is whispered rather than documented. But it exists, and I am one of its instruments. I hold a doctorate in theoretical physics, yes, but my minor was linguistics, ancient tongues, ritual grammars. My clearance designation, issued quietly under the U.S. Department of Energy's Black File, is simpler. Observer of cosmological theoretical threats. I do not intervene. I bear witness to what may not be speakable, and I was dispatched to the southernmost edge of the world for one reason, because humanity had reached that threshold. It began with a signal, though that word is misleading. A focused laser beam, fired from the Oracle Array, a joint U.S. effort housed in geosynchronous orbit, bound for a cold star only 6 light years away, Barnard star. The Oracle's mandate was the detection of alien technosignatures, and the object of its gaze was a fragmentary structure, not a full Dyson Sphere, but a curved segment, suspended and dormant in deep space. Massive, silent, and very clearly engineered. Protocol dictated a reply, a laser pulse encoded with data fired toward the segment. Standard astrophysical expectations dictated silence. It would take 6 years for the pulse to arrive, and another 6 for any response, if one ever came, to return. But the response arrived in 17 minutes, and it didn't come from above. It came from beneath, deep below the ice at the South Pole, within the reconfigured remnants of the Ice Cube Neutrino Observatory, now augmented into a sensor matrix stretching for miles into the glacial shelf. We recorded a neutrino burst rising upward through the Earth's crust, a mirror of the original signal, phase inverted, encoded in a way that didn't follow the curvature of space-time as we understood it. The planet hadn't just received the signal, it had somehow transmitted it back. I arrived 3 days later. The installation was codenamed Polar Deep Observatory 3, though most referred to it simply as Polar. A maze of prefabricated modules connected by pressure-sealed corridors, housing physicists, cryptographers, military liaisons, and a growing sense of controlled panic. I was escorted directly to the Varadex suite, a cold chamber designed for sensory sterilization, every surface lined with acoustic foam, the air filtered until it tasted like absence. I sat in the center, still in my thermal layers, the polymer stool beneath me digging into bone. The lights were flat, clinical. Across from me, behind a slab of reinforced bioglass, sat Jarek Horn, Department of Energy's Behavioral Integrity Auditor. His glasses flickered with data fed from the Panther HUD, built into his ocular overlays, Varadex readings, biometric markers, cognitive vector streams. The Varadex was humming, quiet, low frequency, feeding on the neuroelectrical signals firing through my brain. An apparatus born from DARPA's darker corners. Its purpose, to detect contamination. Not chemical, not viral, cognitive. It measured pattern recognition drift, recursive semantic loops, deviation from expected thought cadence, exposure, in other words, to non-human epistemic systems. "You're clean," Horn murmured. "Baseline is stable, almost textbook." There was a pause. "But others aren't." I didn't need to ask who he meant. I'd already read the internal reports on the plane down. Researchers were beginning to exhibit semantic anomalies, pattern fixation, compulsive linguistic recursion, cryptolexic obsessions. The deeper they analyzed the harmonic data from the Dyson fragment, the more their minds bent. "Your file says you're not just physics," Horn said, his voice unreadable. "You studied ritual frameworks, belief systems as containment structures." "Some frameworks are more resilient to paradox," I answered, aware that my own words would be transcribed, logged, studied. Horn gave a cold smile. "Or maybe some frameworks mistake rigidity for resilience. The paradox doesn't just test the structure, it reshapes it." I said nothing, because I had felt it too. The first time I stood in the seismic analysis room, where the patterns from the neutrino burst were visualized, I felt the echo. Not in my ears, but somewhere older. Something beyond sound, beyond sense. A low harmonic pressure, like a note struck on a tuning fork, submerged in stone. Colonel Mason Core entered the picture that same day. A tall, heavily built man in his late 50s, with eyes that had seen disasters of every category. He brought no metaphysics, just briefings. "Harmonic resonance from sub-level C has risen 12% in the last hour," he said, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "Seismic instabilities increasing. We've traced the epicenter. It correlates precisely with the neutrino echo." He paused. "And with the core sample we pulled last month." I looked up. "The trench glass?" Core nodded. "We thought it was just a geological anomaly at first, but under spectrographic analysis, it's singing the same frequency." He hesitated. "And the patterns we're pulling from the bedrock? They're geometric, precise. Our analysts think they might be schematic. I think they're ritual." He let that hang. "Your job is to tell me if they're binding something." My throat went dry, because I had already reviewed one of those schematics. I had held the printout in my hands the night before, alone in my quarters, my fingers tracing the cold ink. The structure resembled the 4th century eschaton glyphs, a symbolic map of spiritual boundaries written in suppressed Gnostic codices. Diagrams used not to invoke but to confine, and now those same motifs were vibrating beneath our feet. Not in myth, not in metaphor, in geometry, in gravitational harmonics, in reality. And somewhere in that chorus of frequencies, I heard something else. The hum was not a reply. It was a memory, something older than Earth, older than language, singing to us from the bones of the planet, not calling, answering. We had knocked on a door that wasn't a door, and the world itself had replied. Emery Callan stopped sleeping. It happened gradually at first, longer stretches between rest, minor stimulants to chase longer nights. Then came the all-nighters. Then he stopped logging out of the lab altogether. Days passed. He was still there, awake, working, talking sometimes, but not always to anyone present. The others whispered. They called it alignment drift, like Horn had, a clean term, clinical. But the truth of it was messier, dirtier. It was in the way Callan no longer blinked as often, how he moved with the stiff fluidity of someone beginning to forget the weight of their own body. He hadn't just stopped sleeping, he had stopped dreaming because something else had taken that function away from him. What had begun as analysis had become something else. He no longer called it the Dyson harmonics, not even the signal. He called it the liturgy, and it wasn't metaphor. Callan believed it was a real, functioning grammar, cosmic, recursive, unfolding across time, etched into gravitational pulses and frequency cycles. A language not spoken, but broadcast. And the more he translated, the more he changed. I watched him through the lab window one night. He stood in near total darkness, backlit by faint blue glow from the holographic display, his own waveforms spiraling through three-dimensional space like visualized breath. His hands moved in micro-gestures, twitching like a man conducting a silent choir. His lips moved, but no sound came. Later, he told me, almost whispering, It's not responding to the signal, it is the response. Earth's position, our neural architecture, our compulsion for rhythm and meaning. We were always meant to receive. The liturgy was encoded into us. I tried to press him, ask who or what had encoded it. But he just looked at me with eyes that no longer shone with inquiry, but with conviction. The structure wasn't built to contain a thing. It was built to contain a process. The binding is the ritual, and it's incomplete. Around that same time, the trench glass began to pulse. At first, it was subtle, a shimmer at the edge of light captured in the low-resolution feeds from Gamma 7. Then the shimmer became a flicker, and then a rhythm. It matched the Dyson signal. That was when things began to break. Seismic drift accelerated. Harmonic resonance climbed by 15% in less than 6 hours. Core samples near the bedrock began exhibiting anomalous mass readings. Time-delayed sensor pings began arriving before they were sent. The array's deepest systems, hardware, started logging non-existent personnel movements, and then the trench glass pulsed once, brightly, and the image appeared. We were in the command hub when it happened. Horn, Colonel Core, 2 NSA analysts, and myself. The screen sputtered with interference, then stabilized. We saw it. A vista, a star seen from close proximity. Plasma roiling across its surface, magnetic filaments twisting like serpents. The surface of Barnard's star, as if viewed from meters away. But the signal had come from the shard. Not from space. Kalin arrived moments later, breathless and ecstatic, summoned by the alert. His eyes widened with awe as he beheld the image. He didn't speak right away. He just watched, as if the image on the screen wasn't just information. It was confirmation, a reflection not of light, but of intent. "It sees," he whispered. "It reflects. It responds." The prayer was heard. Horn stiffened beside me. "That's not a reflection. That's a live spatial conduit. It's bridging telemetry. This is a physical connection." Core turned to Kalin, steel in his voice. "What exactly are we looking at?" Kalin's mouth trembled into a smile. Alignment, resonance, the point at which the system recognizes the node. Us. And then he turned to me. "You know what this is," he said quietly. "You've read the inverse Psalms. You've studied the rites that unbind. This isn't a message. It's a design. We were always meant to complete it." Horn moved toward the console, attempting to isolate the signal feed. "Containment breach," he muttered. "Epistemic and possibly structural. The object is no longer inert." Core ordered immediate lockdown of Gamma 7. Security mobilized. No personnel in or out. Quarantine initiated. But it wasn't enough, because Kalan had already seeded the transmission. He disappeared 4 hours later, last seen near Sublevel Delta, near the transmission relay. His login credentials had been used to bypass multiple firewalls. Backup systems showed a queued outgoing signal, pre-encoded in harmonic form. The array's main antennae lit up with energy. He had activated the response, and he had done it without consulting anyone. The command hub was in chaos. Core shouted over alarms, systems blinked in and out. The trench glass began to shimmer again, and this time it wasn't showing Barnard's star. It was showing Earth. From above, from orbit. The image rotated slowly, a perfect mirror. Kalin had transformed the shard into a bidirectional window, not a telescope, a communion device. And in the sublevels, according to motion sensors, Kalin still remained, near the convergence point, near what internal records, buried beneath layers of forgotten authorization, referred to as the mouth. I left the command hub that night, wrapped myself in layers of gear, climbed the old access path out toward the ice-rimed outbuildings. The wind howled like something dying. There, beside the rusted remains of an early comms shack, sat Dr. Lev Metz. disgraced linguist, once brilliant, now exiled to observation duty. He looked out over the ice, hunched in silence. He didn't turn to face me, just said, "They think it's a machine. They're wrong." I waited. His voice came, a whisper lost in the snow. "It's not a machine, it's a valve, a pressure seal in the grammar of reality, and it's leaking." He turned to me then, and his eyes were clear in a way that chilled me more than the wind ever could. "You can't shoot silence, Doctor. You can't wall it off. You have to speak it, match its rhythm, or it opens." When I returned to my quarters, something in me had shifted. I went to the archive vault, bypassed digital access, and opened the mislabeled crates marked HAILC. Inside, under vestments and broken equipment, I found a small leather-bound journal, Father Hale's personal notes. Inside were pages of prayer, diagrams, sketches of the bedrock patterns, symbols matching the harmonics. But more than that, notations on Gnostic rituals, warnings written in increasingly urgent Latin scrawl. Silence the echo before it becomes the voice. He had known. He had tried. He had failed. The station rumbled beneath me, and from the speakers, soft and distant, I heard a hum. It was not mechanical. It was not the wind. It was Kalen's voice, singing, and it was not in words. It was in syntax. The descent to sub-level Omega was not sanctioned. There were no orders, no permissions granted. Just silence above and something below, pulling. The alarm still flickered in the upper modules, some on loop, others dead entirely. No one tried to stop me. Those who hadn't fled were in lockdown. Others wandered the upper corridors, mumbling to themselves, their eyes flicking left and right like trapped insects in amber. Not madness. Not exactly. Just a mind out of phase with its frame. I took the freight elevator alone. Flashing red strobes turned the ice-caked walls into pulses of raw muscle, a heartbeat of steel and stone. Then the elevator jammed. I pried the side panel open and dropped into the emergency shaft, climbing down the cold ladder until the signal interference on my headset shrieked and fell silent. Below that line, words didn't work. The air had thickness, not pressure, intent. Like I had stepped not into depth, but into attention. I entered the lower hall through an unpowered bulkhead, and I saw him, Kalen, seated cross-legged before the trench. Not just glass now. The shard was suspended above the floor, slowly rotating, silent and bright with inner light like molten crystal. No scaffolding, no cables. It hovered. He didn't turn to look at me. He was singing, not words, not tones, syntax, rhythmic, recursive, perfect. The song was a self-modulating equation, each phrase a derivative of the last, a spiral climbing toward a harmonic apex I could not bear to describe. It wasn't beautiful. It wasn't ugly. It was correct. Kalan's skin glistened with a thin film of translucent sweat, eyes unfocused but steady. The walls around him had begun to warp. Ice melted not from heat, but from dissonance. Matter itself bending away from the frequencies. "You made it," he said at last. His voice was gentle, pleased. "The mouth is open. The resonance chamber is complete. I couldn't have done it without you." I stepped closer, past lines drawn in red ochre, some ancient symbols smeared over Arctic floor panels. They matched the binding glyphs, now inverted, mirror forms. "You don't know what you've done," I said. "No," he replied. "You don't know what I've undone." Behind him, the shard bloomed. Images appeared inside the surface, not projections, but reflections. Not of us, not of Earth, worlds implied, impossible geometries, structures like frozen theology, vast cathedrals of light where gravity bent like incense smoke, space without anchor. A voice began to rise, not Kalen's, not mine, something else, not language, not sound, recognition, and I understood. It was not we who had discovered the signal, it had discovered us, and it had waited for creatures fragile enough to listen, yet arrogant enough to reply, for minds shaped by rhythm and recursion, for brains eager to resolve pattern from void. The liturgy wasn't a message, it was a seed, planted when Earth first cooled, coded into bedrock, waiting, quiet, watching, and now we had spoken it aloud. I turned, nearly stumbling, trying to flee, but the corridor was gone. The walls had folded in ways my eyes could not reconcile. The shaft above, closed. Geometry obeyed a new author. "You feel it, don't you?" Kaelin whispered. "The vacuum behind the voice, the thing before belief." I backed away, heart pounding. He rose, still smiling. The resonance deepened, physical now, vibrating bone, disassembling sound into meaningless clarity. I cried out, not in fear, in the sharp, tearing grief of someone who finally knows there will be no return, because the echo had found its chamber, and it was us. The shard convulsed in the air, cracking light in all directions, not exploding, unfolding, like a chrysalis opening, releasing not a being, but a logic, the inverse of presence, something that rewrote what it meant to occupy space, to exist. And for the first time in my life, I prayed, not in Latin, not in any language. I prayed in silence, desperate and formless. I prayed that something, anything, might remember what we once were, what we meant to be, before the reply, before we knew. And as the world buckled around me, Kaelin whispered one final thing. "It was never a signal, Doctor. It was a summons.